I said, we are wrapping up a series on dreaming, and this has been such a fun series for us. You've heard from many of our folks, and I know a couple of them have actually said, when we said, what are you dreaming about? They said, oh, I'm living my dream. Like, my dream is not something that's just I'm hoping for in the future, but it's actually my present reality. I get to live my dream. And it struck me that that phrase, living the dream, is not usually used in that context. It's not usually a positive thing. In fact, if I say, hey, how you doing, so-and-so, and they're like, I'm good, I'm living the dream, right? And you hear it and you're like, oh, that sounds awful. And they're using it sarcastically, almost as if to say, I know all this is so unsatisfying. I know my life is a joke. But hey, this is as good as it's going to get. I'm living the dream. And I think that when we are saying that, it's almost as if, like, even if my life is falling apart, if I can just look like I'm living the dream, look like my life is great, then somehow I'm going to be able to keep up with the culture, or at least keep up with the Joneses, my neighbors, and feel like I'm not left out, like I'm not left in the dust. But I think what this leaves us is exhausted. This leaves us comparing ourselves to each other. It's just hugely disappointed, and dare I even say, hugely frustrated. Frustrated when we're living the dream that isn't so exciting or compelling. And interestingly, this is exactly what author Greg McKeown, hope I'm saying his last name right, is telling us in his book, Essentialism. It's up on the screen here. It's called Essentialism, the Disciplined Pursuit of Less. Has anybody happened to read this in the room? Nina, all right, one person. It's a great book. It's not by an overtly Christian author, but he has so many amazing principles about how to get the actual good life and not the life that the culture is spewing out at us. And what I want you to see here is that decision fatigue and all of this ability to just have more and more and more and more actually hinders us from moving forward and pursuing our dreams, because we're stuck sifting through what he calls the just trivial many. There's so many options. We're stuck sifting through it. We ignore, or we can't even find in the pile, the vital few, what he calls the vital few. And so our life ends up looking like this. The highest point of frustration. This is an intense graphic. I'm going to give you just a second to take it in. It really hit me years ago when I read this book. But he says the point of our highest frustration is when the answers to our questions are this. When we say, what should I do? And the answer is everything. Why should I do it? Because it's popular, because it's what everyone else is doing. And when should I do it? Right now. Right now. And so you see that little black dot in the middle of the Venn diagram. That, he says, is humans' highest point of frustration in their life. And I am so sad to tell you that I think this is actually where a lot of us are living. And I don't say that with shame or condemnation. I say that because I have lived there. And I think I am even pulled daily back to that place just because of the cultural waters that we swim in. And so this sounds like a Debbie Downer sermon already, I realize. However, I hope this is not news to you, that like the robots are lying to us, and the commercials are lying to us. And this is actually what the internet and the mall and the advertisers are marketing you to. They are making a play on your desire to be free, your desire for freedom. Endless choices. And how is that defined in our society? It's branded as no limits, no authority, and definitely no waiting. Like, it's instant. That's what they're telling you. And it was funny. I was trying to run through this talk this morning, and I'm on my computer, and I'm getting bombarded. You know, you get those little messages that pop up, little notifications. I don't know why I should just turn these off, right? These little notifications that tell you you have a new email. Well, the problem is I get a new email every 13 seconds. And it's from all the stores and all the online vendors telling me that, guess what? There's a flash sale. And it's happening right now, and only for the next 17 minutes can you buy this really important and vital thing. And if you happen to not click the button in 16 minutes and 59 seconds, you're just going to miss out. Like, you're going to get left behind. There's no more opportunity for you. It's done. It's never coming around again until tomorrow, right? They do. It's like, oh, by the way, we've extended the sale now because now you can have 50% off and all the other cool stuff. And it goes on and on and on. And it just hit me as I was thinking about God's dream for us as a community, God's dream for me as a person, as a mom, as a wife, as a pastor. Oh, you guys, I want us to get this. I want us to understand that this is not life. And I want us to be able to move together in community toward a different story, toward a different way of being, toward a non-anxious, non-hyped, non-stressed out way of living. And so listen to this description from Psalm 92, 12 to 15. It says, "But the godly will flourish like palm trees and grow strong like the cedars of Lebanon. For they are transplanted to the Lord's own house. They flourish in the courts of our God. Even in old age, they will still produce fruit. They will remain vital and green. They will declare, 'The Lord is just. He is my rock. There is no evil in him.'" You and I were not designed to flourish in endless possibilities and endless choices. The Bible here is giving us a different story, and there's so much hope in this. And I just thought it was fitting that we return and end the series with this metaphor of the tree, because I know Amos taught a couple weeks back on Jesus being our tree of life. And the reality is we are made in his image, and so for us to also be called trees is so hopeful to me and so life-giving. And nature just shows us the truth of who God is. Just delightfully brilliant. And so this is God's dream for you. That's what I want to talk to you about today. God's dream for you. We've all been exploring what's my individual dream? What am I made to do? And here God is telling us this is how your life is supposed to function, and this is my dream, that humans would flourish. And the author of this psalm is using really intentional language here to get our attention, to help us notice some things that will get us to this flourishing life. And so to set the stage, I actually want to back up a few verses. In verse 7, we're going to notice a comparison between godly people and wicked. This is not a popular topic to teach on because we don't like being told that there's actually bad people who are opposing us, or that we may in fact ourselves be bad. And the Old Testament does draw a lot on behavior, but to sum this up simply as just good behavior versus bad behavior is not what this text is teaching at this point. This is emphasizing that there's a difference between just doing wicked things, which we all do, we all screw up, and actually being wicked. So actually having a love and a draw and a desire for evil that festers and then wreaks havoc in our lives and wreaks havoc on the lives of other people. Interestingly, in another translation, the word weeds here, I'm going to read this passage. So the wicked sprout like weeds and evildoers flourish. Interesting, there's that word flourish. They will be destroyed forever. In another translation, the word weeds here is translated grass, and that they will be destroyed is translated scattered. And that is so interesting. Grass is being compared to trees. So when you hear the word grass, you think flimsy, fleeting, it pops up really fast, but then it gets eaten up by the livestock really quickly. It's easily blown in the wind. It can travel across the miles, and it can be isolated and scattered and taken out of its place. It has very little root system, and that is how he describes the wicked, people who have chosen a lifestyle of wickedness. Contrast that to godly people, meaning people who have submitted to the authority of Jesus in their life, and they've made him the son of their life. And here we see there's just these two paths. Like, there is a way to live that leads to death and decay, or there's a way to live that leads to life and flourishing and abundance. And isn't it interesting that life here in the Psalms is compared to that of a tree? So let's go back to our passage again. Verse 12, we'll start at the top. But the godly will flourish like palm trees and grow strong like the cedars of Lebanon. So we get really specific descriptions of species of trees in this passage. We have the palm and the cedar. And I did a little bit of research on trees. I'm not an arborist. My father-in-law actually owned a tree service, so I woke up this morning and thought, why didn't I ask him to give me some pointers about teaching about trees? But that be it as it is. I'll just tell you what I found out. So palms and cedars, these massive trees. These are massive, sturdy, long-living trees that are centuries old. Not even decades old, centuries old. And I think about redwoods in California or the great sequoias. I've been there. It's like you look like just a tiny little speck next to these massive trunks of these trees. So interestingly, I thought, well, palm trees, that doesn't sound that exciting. And maybe it's true, but when you think of palm tree, what fruit do you think of them producing? Coconuts, exactly. And you would be right if you were talking about palm trees that are on the ocean coast. Like in Florida, you definitely do get coconuts from a palm tree. That is not the kind of palm tree that grows in Israel. In Israel, they have date palms. And date palms grow in the desert, in arid places. Isn't that interesting? Here God is telling us there's something about flourishing that comes from him that happens no matter what the climate, that happens actually in spite of the climate not being very supportive for our growth and flourishing. These palms grow up sturdy and strong and tall where resources are thin. And actually, the reason they survive is because the palm tree is unchanged by its circumstances, by the climate. Doesn't matter what season it goes through, the palm tree stays firm, stays steady. And so really to live and thrive in Jesus' truth, we need to let God be the greatest influencer of our lives so that we can be unchanged when the culture around us tells us more chaos, more stress, more busyness, more stuff. This passage is telling us you can remain unchanged if you remain in Jesus. You can stay firm and you do not have to be influenced by those things. And it's interesting here because I just think the psalmist really wants us to get this because, again, we have it compared to the grass. It springs up quickly. It's instant. It's convenient. It's fast. It's easy. And then it's gone. And if you've planted a tree in your yard, like some of you have probably been like, come on, I wish it would just hurry up and grow. Like, I really want to build a tree house in this tree. Or I would love for it to have a big enough branch that it could support a swing for my kids and my grandkids. Or maybe you just want it to have a lot of big leaves on it quickly so that it provides more shade for your yard. But that is not what this passage is saying. This passage is saying, no, a rooted, secure, firm life is a slow-growing thing. It's not fast. It's actually not very perceivable to us if we were to watch a tree grow day over day. You don't really see anything happening. So the good, godly life, what I want you to know is this good, godly life probably sometimes doesn't look like it's so good. Like in the moment when you have to make hard choices, it's probably not going to look good compared to the fast, rapid success that's happening all around you. But trees endure for centuries. And not only do they last, but they have a defined place where they're nurtured. And so verse 13, it goes on to say, the trees are transplanted to the Lord's own house. They flourish in the courts of our God. So this verse speaks to where we are to reside if we want to flourish. And again, this is not just anywhere you feel like. This is the very popular message. It doesn't matter where you live. It doesn't matter who you hang out with. It doesn't matter where you go. You can do great. No, our true and best life happens in God. And here it says, in the Lord's own house. And the author here repeats this for poetic emphasis. He says, in the Lord's house, and then he says, in the courts of our God. And house and court in this verse actually are pretty synonymous, but the thing that really struck me is the king's courts are a safe, enclosed space, usually very ornamental, but it's where the family was. It's where you spent time with your family. It's like your yard at your house. Your kids are outside playing in the yard, and that's where the memories are made. That is where the good stuff happens. That's where discovery happens and growth happens and life and vibrancy and fun. But there is double meaning here in this verse. God's house here is also referring to us as the church. Dreaming has to happen in community. Have you guys noticed that? You can have great ideas, you can have great inspiration, but we actually need each other. I need to bounce things off you. I need to be redirected by you sometimes toward the better thing. And I love that the NLT here uses the word transplanted. The trees are transplanted. Actually, in the Hebrew, the word planted and transplanted are both okay interpretations of that word, but transplanted makes me think isn't this good news that I just don't have to luck out and be planted in the right family in the right time in history? It doesn't matter what your family of origin is. It doesn't matter how much you've screwed up. It doesn't matter if you planted yourself in really terrible soil for a season and drew up really terrible things and messed up bad. God says, no, my dream for you is that you be taken up out of that space and transplanted into the house of God. So good. And I think really to help this sink deep today, I want you to hear this Radiolab excerpt. It is a scientist. It cuts in where a scientist has this dog named Jigs, and the dog fell into a hole. Well, actually, it's not really a hole. It was like a pit toilet. So really bad. If you can imagine your dog falling into a pit toilet, this would be pretty impossible to try to dig them out. So take a listen to this excerpt.
And Jigs was, looking up with his paws, and looking at us, waiting.
And they're digging and digging and digging. And then all of a sudden, she says she looks down into the ground and she notices that all around them where the soil has been cleared away, there are roots upon roots upon roots in this thick, crazy tangle.
We're sitting on the exposed root system, which is it is like a mat. It's just a massive mat of intertwining exposed roots that you could walk across and never fall through.
She says it was like this moment where she realizes there's this whole other world right beneath my feet.
Jigs had provided this incredible window for me, in this digging escapade to see how many different colors they were, how many different shapes there were, that they were so intertwined, as abundant as what was going on above ground. It was magic for me.
Now, if you fast forward roughly 30 years, she then makes a discovery that I find kind of amazing. She says a timber company would move in and clear cut an entire patch of forest and then plant some new trees.
And, my job was to track how these new plantations would grow.
And she says she began to notice things that, one wouldn't really expect, like trees of different species are supposed to fight each other for sunshine, right? You've heard that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they have to,
they shade each other out.
They shade each out and they push each other away so they can get to the sky. But she was noticing that in a little patch of forest that she was studying, if she had, say, a birch tree next to a fir tree, and if she took out the birch,
the Douglas fir became diseased and died. There was some kind of benefit from the birch to the fir. there was a healthier community when they were mixed, and I wanted to figure out why. And so I designed this experiment to figure that out. It was a simple little experiment.
So here's what she did. She went into the forest, got some trees.
Douglas fir, birch, and cedar. And then I would cover them in plastic bags. So I'd seal the tree in a plastic bag, and then I would inject gas, so tagged with an isotope, which is radioactive.
So these trees were basically covered with bags that were then filled with radioactive gas.
Yeah.
Which the trees
would just suck up through photosynthesis.
So now they had the radioactive particles inside their trunks and their branches.
We had a Geiger counter out there. As soon as we labeled them, we used the Geiger counter and ran it up and down the trees, and we could tell that they were hot. They were boo, 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 right?
And the idea was she wanted to know, like, once the radioactive particles were in the tree, what happens next? Would they stay in the tree, or would they go down to the roots? And then what happens? And what she discovered is that all these trees that were of totally different species, were sharing their food underground. Like, if you put food into one tree over here, it would end up in another tree maybe 30 feet away over there, and then a third tree over here, and then a fourth tree over there, and a fifth tree over there, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th. All in all, it turns out one tree was connected to 47 other trees all around it. It was like a huge network.
Yeah. I just had to play that for you, because what a beautiful illustration of care and concern for another, that the root system became so enmeshed, and that there was actually no separation then between what feeds me and what feeds you. And isn't that what happens when we're really truly living our dreams? That I'm getting fed, but nothing has to be detracted from me. It just helps you grow. It just nourishes you too. And so verse 14, even in old age, they will still produce fruit. They will remain vital and green. So not only does our flourishing mean that we are green and vital ourselves, like I said, but we actually get to produce fruit. And guys, the crazy thing about these date palms that I discovered was that the best dates that they produce are when they're between 30 and 100 years old. And it's in the later part of their life where they can produce a yield of up to 300 pounds of dates per year. And that is just double, triple, quadruple what they can produce in their infant stages and their young stages. And so what I want you to hear is, you godly people in the room who are up in age, you have a ripe experience, you have ripe stories, and they can feed us. In fact, they can feed many, many people. And so we need you. We need you in this community to dream and to flourish and to help us dream too. And interestingly, as I'm listening to this Radio Lab, I'm struck that maturity is not becoming more independent like the world tells us. It's actually becoming more interdependent. So what you hear them say is, like, the older trees, I think it goes on in the podcast, the older trees have the most widespreading and developed root system, because they are old, because they have strength in that age. And then interestingly, I do not have time to talk about this. This is a whole other talk, but you notice that it's like the birch tree and the cedar tree or whatever it was, and when one of them gets taken out, the other one becomes diseased. And isn't it interesting that it's not two birch trees next to each other, take out one birch tree, and then you become diseased? No, it's actually saying, like, there's something terrible that happens when you cut out diversity. When we want to just stay in this place where everything's homogeneous, that's actually not what flourishing looks like either. So ultimately, God's dream for you is that you produce good fruit. We get to contribute, you guys. And I've misinterpreted this producing fruit bit in my life to be like, just be busier, be more productive, serve, give, burn yourself out. But that's not what it's saying here. It's saying those things that are real gut level convictions that are just in you to do, that they will just come out of you whether or not you have a title or a paycheck or a label or anything. Those are the things that are probably not going to just be for you. They're probably going to be for the flourishing and the wholeness and the healing even of other people. And I think you heard that in Terry's dream, you heard that in Hans's dream, and I think it's actually in all of us. So, church, this is the call. Can we put down our roots into community? Can we actually put down roots into submitting to a way of life that follows Jesus and not the culture? I think it's going to mean that we have to get back to these very basic elements of human interaction, the things that we have lost. And the practices that keep us strong like these trees. Reading our Bibles, having a conversation with God, meeting together over a meal and sharing our lives together. We cannot lose these things because technology and the internet is actually pulling us further and further apart, even though it's claiming to connect us. We're more isolated, we're more alone. And so I need godly people in my life. It's not just any community. I need godly people. I need people who are following Jesus to help me know how to cut out all the other stuff so that my life doesn't look like this graph again. And instead, it looks like this one. This is our highest point of contribution. When the answers to the questions are, I'm doing the right things for the right reason at the right time. And again, you notice that little blob, that little black spot in the middle is not a very big portion of that Venn diagram. There's a lot of white mess in there to get lost in. But the real life, the real dream, the real flourishing is right in the center there, where we know who we're following, we're doing his ways, and we're doing it in his timing. And so now, the real question is, how do we know what the right things are? I mean, I kind of already alluded to it. It's like staying in relationship, doing the basic human interaction things, reading your Bible, praying. Again, this is not out of a space of judgment. It's out of like, this is actually what we need to thrive. And so if you're a Christian here today, and if you're following Jesus, I think you already know the reason. You got that one checked off. Now you just really need God to help you know what are the right things to do. And I think he's trustworthy to ask because he created us and because his dreams for us are actually bigger than ourselves. And so I want to leave you with this. I recently went to my friend Abigail's house, and the first thing she said when I walked into the door, I was like 2 feet in, she's like, here, read this. And she thrust me this book. I'm like, okay, well, that's an interesting introduction. So I'm like standing in the threshold of the door, and I just kind of look at her. I'm like, okay. So I start reading this book, and just tears are just coming down. And I can't even speak, but many times during the book, I pause and I like look up at her, like, where did you get this? This is awesome. And so I finish the book. I still can't speak. And she looks at me and she says, yeah, right? Don't you think adults need to hear this too? So yeah, spoiler alert, it was a children's book. And I want to read you for the last few moments, just a part of this book. It's called When God Made You. And like I said, I have not gotten through this book without crying, ever. So if I do, that will be awesome, but bear with me if I don't. And I have, the illustrations are just stunning as well, so I have these up here for you. You, when God dreams about you, God dreams about all that in you will be true. That you, God's you, will be hopeful and kind, a giver who lives with all heart, soul, and mind. A dreamer who dreams in big and small themes, who keeps dreaming and journeys upstream. a mover, a shaker, a lover of nature, a builder of bridges, you, the peacemaker. A you who views others as sisters and brothers and lives by 3 words, love one another. A confident you, strong and brave too. You being you is God's dream coming true. Because when God made you, all of heaven was beaming. Over you, God was smiling and already dreaming. So let's stand. Holy Spirit, we invite you to come now. Would you come and help us respond to your truth? That you do have a blueprint for the way that our life is to go well. So in this silence, God, would you show us maybe what needs to be cut away or pruned out? The things that are the trivial many that have entangled us. And God, would you now show us what those right things are? The good and beautiful and life-giving things that we get to do simply because we're loved by you and simply because we're created to do them. Help us to notice what remains when all the mess and the chaos sifts to the bottom. What is there for us to take hold of, God?